President Chen, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, June 28th, and it's now 6 o'clock. I am calling our special board meeting to order. And our first order of business is our flag salute. So if everyone would please repeat after me with our flag salute. There we go. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you. Next up is our roll call. Trustee Corzo.
Here.
Trustee Proctor.
Here.
Trustee Warren.
Here.
And Trustee Watkins.
Here.
And I am here as well. We are going into item 4, which is approval of agenda. I'm going to make one amendment to the agenda. There was a mix-up on the attachments for 7.1 and 7.2. Two of them just got swapped. So on 7.1, the attachments should be the public hearing notice proposal for the waiver and the public hearing waiver application PowerPoint. And then for 7.2, the attachment should be the resolution number 4020-21. So we're just going to make that amendment. Does anybody else have any questions about the agenda or wants to make an amendment there? Great. So I will make that motion to amend the agenda in that format. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Trustee Proctor. Roll call vote, Trustee Corzo.
Yes.
Trustee Proctor.
Yes.
Trustee Warren.
Yes.
Trustee Watkins.
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. So the agenda is amended. Before we move on to public statements, 5.1, Trustee Corzo, would you mind doing the language translation services announcement, please?
Sure. Si alguien ocupa traducción, si la tenemos disponible, pueden empujar la imagen del mundo o levantar la mano. Gracias.
Fantastic. Thank you, Trustee Corzo. So now we're on 5.1, which is really public statements related to agenda items. Persons will be called at the appropriate time. We are now on item 6 is the consent agenda. I apologize. I do not have the correct reading of the agenda, the actual language. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, the agenda. Well, actually 5.1, which is, the consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda are considered by the board to be routine and will be enacted by the board in one motion in the form listed below. There will be no discussion on these items prior to the time the board votes on the motion unless members of the board, staff, or public request specific items to be removed and discussed from the consent agenda. The superintendent and staff recommend approval of all consent items. Movement of any recommended consent item is appropriate at this time. Does any board member want to pull anything on the consent agenda? Peter, would you mind asking for the public if they request to?
For those of you that are just joining us for the first time, if you have any particular items on the consent agenda you would like to make public comment on or have the board pull and discuss, please use the raise your hand functionality within Zoom now. Okay, President Chin, we have no hands for public comment on consent items.
Great, thank you. I'm looking for a motion for approval of the consent agenda. Anybody?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Trustee Proctor, for the motion and Trustee Watkins for the second. Roll call vote, Trustee Corzo.
Yes.
Trustee Proctor.
Yes.
Trustee Warren.
Yes.
Trustee Watkins.
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. Consent agenda has been approved 5-0. We're moving on to 7.1, which is the public hearing of the proposal to apply for waiver of the election requirement in transition to by trustee area election systems. I am going to officially open the public hearing, and we do have a PowerPoint presentation from our county council. So Rosendo, please take it away.
Thank you, President Chen. At this time, I will share my screen to give the audience members, the members of the public, a brief overview of the purpose of tonight's hearing. Tonight's public hearing is in regards to an application for a waiver of the election requirement for the transition to a bi-trustee area election system. On June 10th of this year, the board adopted a resolution stating its intent of the board to transition from its current at-large election system to a bi-trustee area election system. The final process in the transition is a formal adoption of the ordinance to transition to bi-trustee area elections by the County Committee on School District Organizations. After a county committee on school district organization approves the district's ordinance to make the transition official, the final step would be for the measure to go on the ballot, and the voters would have a say whether the district actually does transition from a from an at-large election system to a bi-trustee area election system. However, there is a way to streamline the process, and that would be to apply for a waiver of the election requirement through the California Department of Education. The application is submitted through CDE, California Department of Education, and the matter is ultimately heard and decided by the State Board of Education. So what is the waiver process in a nutshell, and what does it mean? In order to submit an application for the waiver process, for the waiver of the election process, there's a series of steps that need to be completed. One of the steps is consultation with either an advisory committee or committees or school site councils. Consultation with the bargaining units, such as the CSCA bargaining unit and the Teachers Association bargaining unit. In other words, the district's unions. The third prong is a public hearing on the waiver application and ultimate board approval on a resolution that would authorize the superintendent or designee to actually file an application with CDE to waive the election requirement. And the last step is to actually file the waiver with the CDE, California Department of Education, which is ultimately heard by the State Board of Education. Something that's very important then that the public needs to know, and which is why I put in big bold, please note, the waiver application does not eliminate the public's right to vote for school board members. Your right as a member of the public and as a voter to vote for your school board members will not be eliminated. If the matter were to go on the ballot, there would be two questions and two options on a vote. The first option would be yes to transition into a bi-trustee area election, or no to transition into a bi-trustee area election. However, if the measure were to fail, the district would not be shielded from any potential litigation pursuant to the California Voting Rights Act, nor would it be able to transition to a bi-trustee area election system, which is favored by the law, by civil rights groups, and primarily by members of the community who feel that their voices may not be heard, or in the past may not have been collectively heard. What happens if the SBE approves a waiver? Well, once a waiver is approved by the State Board of Education, the district could conduct its subsequent elections for the Board of Trustees by the bi-trustee area election system, again, foregoing the need to place the measure on the ballot for voter approval. Why is there an election requirement, or why are we seeking to waive the election requirement? Well, The applying for the waiver allows the transition to a CVRA compliant election process to be effective for the next round of elections, which is in 2022. And it would avoid any potential claims under the CVRA. The district would also be able to avoid the costs associated with elections. It would also be able to avoid the uncertainty as to the outcome of an election to approve the change in its election methodology. And an interesting prong, but a very true prong, is that it may be viewed as incompatible with civil rights to ask the majority to decide whether minority voting rights should be protected. So the goal of tonight's public hearing and the purpose for the opportunity for the constituents of the district and voters in the community is to solicit input from the public and district stakeholders regarding the submission of an application to waive the election requirement as part of the transition process to a by-trustee area election system. And again, I want to stress, and I want to stress highly, this does not eliminate the voters' rights to vote for their next round of trustees or for trustees in general. This is simply to forego the final step in the election, in the transition to a by-trustee area election system, and that is to allow the board through the superintendent or designee to file an application with the California Department of Education to waive the election requirement. Thank you, President Chen.
Thank you, Rosendo. Opening up to board member questions, I'm just going to ask a quick question right now.
Sure.
Rosendo, it's my understanding that we would be applying for this waiver no matter what, but we really, in the normal process, normal timeline, we'd be applying for it in like 2 months or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Under normal circumstances, you can apply for the waiver, later on in the process. But because of timelines and the way that CDE is requiring applications, or excuse me, the lead time that CDE is requiring for the admission or the submission of applications, we want to be able to have CDE hear this in September of this year. And in order to do that, we need to submit the application as soon as possible. And in order to do that, the board needs to take action, but most importantly, the community members need to be given the opportunity to voice their concerns, their support, or any other public input that they may have. One thing to note of importance is that currently there is a bill going through the legislature, the state legislature. It's SB 422. If approved, and at this stage, based on all the information we have available, there is zero opposition to it, but it has not been signed by the governor. If that Senate bill is signed by the governor, it will go into law or to be effective January 1st, 2022. And the most important highlight of that bill is it would eliminate the election requirement as part of the final step. And the final decision would rest on the County Committee on School District Organization. So hypothetically, if we were to be doing this process next year, there is a 99% chance that we wouldn't have to submit an application for a waiver because an election requirement would not be needed, or excuse me, would not be a requirement. So right now we're doing it as a safety measure.
So just to clarify, so we normally would have been submitting this in September, but from a previous conversation you and I had, and so is leading, is that, because of the backlog over the last, year and a half, and because of COVID and everything else, they basically are asking us if we're going to submit it for a waiver to submit it earlier so we can get in the queue. Is that essentially?
That is correct. When I spoke to the folks over at the CDE, their advice to me and to the district was submit it at least 2 months in advance. Okay.
And so that's why we're hearing it now rather than doing it in September, just
Correct.
to get in the queue. Okay. Okay. Does everybody else have any questions? Board questions? Okay. Why don't we go to public comment, please, Peter?
Yes, if there are any members of our public that would like to make public comment in the hearing, please use the raise your hand functionality within Zoom now. Okay, President Chin, we have one. Randy, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, so quick question just about the rush to getting this in the queue for September. And this is just going back to the lawyer comment that was in the last board meeting. So what are the forces that are like pushing this to get done in September as opposed to allowing this to go a little bit longer just so that the census results are in and so this doesn't have to be refactored? I mean, is there a little bit of wisdom to allowing this to extend a month or two longer just to be able to incorporate those census results? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. President Chen, we have no other hands for comment during the public hearing.
Thank you. I'm going to officially close public comment. Rosenda, would you mind answering the question?
Absolutely, absolutely. The time period to, so I just want to make sure that there's an understanding as to the two different time periods here. First, we have the transition to a by-trustee area election system. On June 10th of this year, as I previously mentioned, the board adopted its resolution of intent. The adoption of that resolution of intent was in part associated with the district receiving a letter from an attorney by the name of Scott Rafferty, where he highlights that the district may be in violation of the California Voting Rights Act. That letter is available for public inspection. It's posted on the district's website dedicated to the transition to a by-trustee area election system. So once the resolution of intent was adopted, the district has 90 days to complete the process. And by completing the process, we talk about the final step. And the final step is the formal adoption of a resolution by the County Committee on School District Organization. So the waiver application is technically a separate process that's governed by the Ed Code and by the California Department of Education. The transition to a by-trustee area election system is governed by the Elections Code and the Ed Code. So we have two different things at play here. But the purpose for getting the waiver application in now is so that we can tailor it and have it fall in line concurrently with hopefully the final process of the transition, which would be based on the 90-day timeline from June 10th, 2021. So if we calculate the 90 days, that brings us to September 8th of this year. But again, they are two separate matters. They are connected at some point, but they are treated differently based on timelines and based on the provisions of the law. Ed Code versus Elections Code, but Ed Code is intertwined with the Elections Code on the actual transition process.
Okay, thank you, Rosendo. Does anybody have any other comments before we move on? This is an informational item. The actual next item is up for action. Any other comments on this item? No? Okay, why don't we move on to, do I officially close the public hearing on this item 7.1, and we're moving on to 7.2, which is the proposal to apply for the waiver. Rosenda, we do not have a presentation here on this. We just have the resolution. And so I'm going to open it up for clarifying questions on the resolution. Anybody questions on the resolution? No? Okay, I'll open up to public comment on the resolution.
Any members of the public that would like to make public comment on this item, the actual resolution for the waiver of election requirement, please use the raise your hand functionality within Zoom now. Okay, President Chin, we have no hands for public comment.
Great, thank you. I'm going to close the public comment on this item and open it up for board comments or a motion for approval. Anyone have any comments? Does anyone want to make a motion? Anyone?
I will. I will make the motion to approve the resolution to apply for the waiver of election requirements in transitioning to by-trustee area election system.
I'll second.
Thank you, Trustee Proctor, for the motion. Trustee Corzo for the second. Roll call vote. Trustee Corzo.
Yes.
Great. Thank Trustee Proctor.
Yes.
Trustee Warren,
Yes.
trustee Watkins,
Yes.
and I will vote yes as well. Okay, the motion is carried 5-0. Lastly on our agenda is the adjournment. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, trustee Watkins for the motion.
Second.
Thank you, trustee Corzo for the second. Roll call vote, trustee Corzo,
Yes.
trustee Proctor,
Yes.
trustee Warren,
Yes.
trustee Watkins,
Yes.
and I will vote yes as well. Okay, thank you, guys. Our special meeting is officially adjourned at 6:21. Thank you very much. See you guys later.
Thank you, board.